Hello, my name is Andrew Gomison, and that sound means it's time for another Culture Watch podcast. This podcast is a ministry of Speaking for Him, and I'm so glad that you have joined me. I would hope that if you find encouragement from what I have to share, that you would share this with your family and friends. That's how the ministry of Speaking for Him continues and grows, and that's how Jesus is able to be shared with more and more people. The reason that the Culture Watch podcast exists is because I feel that it is very important to shed light on current events and news items from a Christian perspective. And I'm super grateful to be able to do that with you each and every week. And I'm excited to share with you this brand new episode. So without further ado, let's look at news for the week of June 15th. So today I want to start out by bringing us to Texas, where Carmelo Anthony learned his fate for the stabbing of a fellow track athlete.
19-year-old Carmelo Anthony sentenced to 35 years in prison for fatally stabbing 17-year-old Austin Metcalf at a track meet. Metcalf's father delivering an emotional victim impact statement saying, quote, "We were robbed. This was never about race. It is about right and wrong. My son's death destroyed the person I used to be. He does not exist anymore. You're going to prison. I forgave you the day it happened. I don't forgive what you did. You can't look me in the eyes, but you can stab my bleeping son." The Collin County DA adding this.
Today, justice was served. Despite the trauma of witnessing the senseless murder at a school track meet, they cooperated fully and testified truthfully. Their courage was essential to securing justice in this case. This verdict sends a clear message. Violence like this won't be tolerated in our Collin County community, and we remain committed to protecting our schools and standing with victims and their families.
Former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Detainee Affairs, Cully Stimson, joins me now. Cully, yesterday was about analyzing the verdict and the sentence. Today is about what comes next. On what grounds do you expect the defense to appeal this verdict?
Well, they're going to look for any errors they believe the trial judge made or the prosecutor made. And I think the first one they're going to do is they're going to file what's called a Batson claim. Batson versus Kentucky was the Supreme Court case that says you cannot use race as the primary factor to exercise your peremptory challenge to get rid of potential jurors. And the prosecution did excuse three jurors who were black, so they will appeal that and say that was done in an unconstitutional way. Now, you can excuse minority members of the jury for non-racial reasons, and the prosecutor did give a facially non-racial reason for that. So that will be one area of appeal, but they'll look at they'll get the trial transcripts, and they'll look at every aspect of the trial and what the judge did, and then they'll appeal on those grounds.
And the non-racial reason prosecutors gave was those three black individuals on the jury, potentially on the jury, were teachers, and there were concerns that they would be too deferential to students. Let's go a little bit more to the defense strategy in this. Could you discern what their strategy was? Because quite frankly, Cully, I can't.
Well, I can, and the only reason I can is because I've been a defense attorney and I had a bad hand sometimes. The facts were totally against my client, and so I think they took the spaghetti against the wall defense, and that is either shoot for a total acquittal, which was not going to happen based on the facts in this case, and certainly not after their own defense witness got turned sideways by the prosecutor and admitted that Karmelo was in the wrong. Or go for the heartstrings and try to get them to convict on the manslaughter. And I think it was a Pyrrhic victory for them to get the judge to include the manslaughter lesser included offense charge to the jury. So I think a victory for them would have been a manslaughter conviction. And I think that was the defense.
Interesting. Okay. Let's play a snapshot of some of the protests outside court, and I'm going to ask you some questions about them. Listen.
It was off of race. This case was built off of race. As a former prosecutor, this was a legal lynching that happened in this slaughterhouse. This is a slaughterhouse. This is not a courthouse. Those domestic racist terrorists.
To be clear, it's a little bit tough to hear the last line. Those twins are domestic racist terrorists. If that incendiary accusation was true, wouldn't the defense have brought that out to attack the victim's character, albeit a risky strategy? I understand, but you even said we're throwing stuff against the wall here to see what sticks. Or do you think the defense was too scared to open up a character attack line of questioning for what it would have meant for their client?
Well, number one, it was irrelevant. Race was irrelevant in this case, except in the minds of these protesters. And I think the defense knew that they tried to go down that road, the judge would have shut them down, because race was not a factor in this case. I'd like to know where these protesters are every day in Chicago when you have thousands over the years of black men killing other black men. Where are they calling for justice in those cases? They're not. And so they're trying to monetize the tragedy of one boy killing another boy. If this was two white dudes getting in a fight and one died, or two black dudes, this wouldn't even been on your channel or any other news channel.
I think that's a really valid point. And to your point, both sides, defense and prosecution, explicitly stated this wasn't about race, yet the protesters outside the court seem to have a different take. Cully Stimson.
Okay, so first of all, as a refresher a little bit on this case, I just want to let you know that a couple of years ago, I believe, there was an altercation at a high school track meet between Carmelo Anthony and the victim in this case. Carmelo Anthony apparently was on an opposing track team, but he, if I remember correctly, was not even in school or allowed to compete because he was on suspension for prior bad acts. So that's the first thing that I remember. But the second thing to remember here is that right after Carmelo Anthony was arrested for this crime, he admitted to doing it. So that is the first thing to point out. The second thing to point out is that, isn't it interesting that both sides, the defense and the prosecution, said that this was not about race, that this was simply about the fact that one person murdered another. And he's exactly right. If it was two white people or two black people, it would be viewed very differently. And it's just so amazing to me that so many people can look at this and say that it was racially motivated, the conviction, and not realize that it was simply because one young man decided to take justice into his own hands and kill another young man. Now, Carmelo Anthony's side claims that these young boys were bullying him. There are a lot of people that get bullied on a daily basis that do not resort to murder. Now, does that make bullying right? Absolutely not. Please hear and understand me. I'm not saying that this is the correct response. What I am saying is that it's very sad when you have people defending this young man and saying that his conviction for a capital crime of murder is wrong. And there was even a congressman who tweeted about this when the verdict came down, who said, if you are rejoicing, if you are celebrating the fact that Carmelo Anthony was convicted in this matter, then you have no business celebrating Juneteenth. Here's the thing. If Carmelo Anthony was the one who was killed, I would want his killer, white or black, to face the maximum amount of justice. So this is not about white or black. This is about a murderer needing to be punished for murder. So let's get that straight. It needed to happen. I'm actually, quite frankly, surprised that it was only 35 years and not a life sentence. I'm not sure what the status of the death penalty is in Texas, but there was a time not too long ago when the death penalty was in place. Maybe that's just for federal crimes. I don't know. What I do know is that justice was meted out yesterday, and I'm super glad for the Metcalf family that their son received justice for his murder, because that's what it was, pure and simple. It was murder. And as I said, it doesn't matter who was involved, it was still wrong and needed to be dealt with swiftly. We are living in a time when people will literally look at the bad things certain people have done and turn a blind eye because somehow if they are black or a minority race, it's okay for them to do. Remember, that was the whole tactic of the 2020 riots. I hate to get too off track, but I think it's somewhat related. Just this week, Sonny Houston said that the 2020 riots were not nearly as bad as January 6th. I don't know where she was in 2020, but she obviously didn't have her eyes open if she really believes that. Because there were riots all over the United States during 2020 because of Black Lives Matter, because of the death of George Floyd. And you can argue and debate whether the death of George Floyd was justified. The coroner and the medical examiner say that he died because of drug issues in his body and that he would have died without the intervention of Derek Chauvin, and that Derek Chauvin didn't actually play a big role in his death. But whatever you believe about what happened to George Floyd, there were riots all over America for that. And in the case of January 6th, there were several hundred people that descended on Washington to support President Trump, and a couple hundred that breached the Capitol. That was nothing in comparison to the myriad of riots in 2020, the myriad of times when statues were torn down by mad and rioting people, and some of them probably didn't even know what they were protesting. This is the part that gets me so riled up, is that people don't even understand what they're mad about. Now, in this case, they may understand it, misguided though they may be, but I just heard another semi-related story about how the homeless population of LA said that they were paid to vote for the incumbent, Mayor Bass. So if you think this type of thing of people being riled up about things they don't understand isn't happening, I beg you to understand that it is. And here's the bottom line: that we have a code of law and justice in this country. That we have a young man, Carmelo Anthony, who admitted to doing the crime. That we have a prosecution and a defense who both said that this wasn't about race. And so I believe that justice was served. And believe it or not, I do not hold a lot of malice for Carmelo Anthony. My hope is that he would go to prison, that he would get a chance to attend chapel services, that he would come to know the Lord Jesus Christ, and that he would be miraculously saved. And that after he was miraculously saved, that he would reach out and truly give a remorseful apology to the Metcalf family. Now, even if all that happened, should he serve his complete 35-year sentence? Yes, he should. Because Jesus gives us freedom from our sin. But often, even after we receive freedom from our sin, from a spiritual perspective, we still have to pay the consequences of that sin. And I'm grateful, as I said, that we have a justice system, and I'm grateful that that justice was served. Now, apparently there were 3 black jurors that were dismissed by the prosecution from the jury pool, and some people say it was because of racism. They cited that it was because these people were teachers and they thought it would be difficult for them to make a decision between 2 students. And I think that's a pretty legitimate reason for excusing a juror. The goal of every defense and prosecution is to work together to form the best jury. And it has to be one of the most difficult tasks in the world to assemble an unbiased jury, just because we have so much news coverage and a 24/7 access to it thanks to our cell phones and computers. Because I would venture to guess there wasn't a single juror that hadn't heard the basics of the story. Because you literally have to have your head in the sand not to realize what had gone on in Texas at this track meet some time ago. Well, moving right along, I have another story that I want to share with you, and this one really hits me hard. This is a story about social media influencers who have used the murder of their unborn baby for financial gain and fame.
A YouTube star and his wife announcing online that they chose to abort their baby after receiving a Down syndrome diagnosis. Jesse Ridgway took to X to defend their decision, posting, quote, "This week, my wife and I made the very difficult decision to terminate the pregnancy due to trisomy 21, or Down syndrome. Down syndrome isn't a blessing. It is objectively a blank. I didn't realize just how rough it is for the child, let alone the family." Lila Rose joins me now, and she is the founder and president of Live Action, and she joins me now. Lila, it's so great to have you on. So one of the interesting things, he posted this, had video with him and his wife. They were crying about having aborted their child because they felt like this was some sort of terminal diagnosis, which it is not. And I'm living proof of that. So, but the backlash has been enormous. Have you, as you know, you've been fighting your whole life to change the culture and make it a culture of life where everyone is accepted. Are you heartened by the backlash towards this YouTube star?
Yes, I think, Rachel, America still has a conscience because we know instinctually that this is a baby. When this YouTuber said, you know, we're terminating the pregnancy, and they were talking about their little boy. They'd already done a gender reveal. They had ultrasound images that they shared online. This little boy was 19 or 18 weeks old. And from the moment of conception, he'd been a precious human being that deserved protection. And now he was, within weeks, could have been old enough to survive outside the womb. And he was subject to an extremely excruciating second trimester abortion because he was deemed not good enough. And so I think America is still repulsed by eugenics, which is targeting innocent human life because they're not seen as good enough. And that's exactly what this YouTuber very publicly did. And the outcry was huge.
Yeah, I think he really pulled the curtain back. I think all of us know that eugenics is happening. It's not just against the disabled, but also we know that there are people who wanted a boy and got a girl, and they're doing it. So there's a lot of gender abortions going on as well. And it's sort of pulling back the curtain. And I think that's a good thing. I'll tell you, Lila, when little Valentina, when we got her diagnosis with Down syndrome, we knew immediately that she was going to have a heart issue that was obvious from the ultrasound. And Brett Baer reached out to me immediately because he had a son who had a different condition, but a heart condition nonetheless, and said, hey, do you need help with the doctors? He didn't say, go abort your kid. He understood that my child was as human as his child. It's just remarkable. To that point, I want you to see what he posted about his dog who had a kidney issue. He wrote, Sweets, that's the name of the dog, Sweets, Sweet's super 6th birthday after she was diagnosed with stage 4 kidney disease last year around her 5th birthday. The vet said she had only weeks to live. If we were lucky, maybe a few months. 1 year later, she's still fighting. She's part of the 0.001% of superhero dogs that can continue living with no kidneys. We all need a hero in this life. Jenny has been one of mine. So here he is talking about his dog. Your reaction?
When dogs are deemed more valuable and worth fighting for, even medically, than babies, than human beings, then we are on a path to doomsday in this country. The good news is this, again, disgusted, concerned, broke the hearts of truly millions of people who saw this YouTuber say this online. I pray for him and his wife that they wake up to the reality of what they did. And children with Down syndrome are precious, are gifts from God. This lie about the quality of life that has really pervaded our culture, that if the child won't have good quality of life, then they should be killed in the womb, has got to be rejected once and for all. A child with Down syndrome today, the average life expectancy is 60 years old. In the 1960s, Rachel, it was 10 years old. Medical technology and care like you have for your beautiful little Valentina has increased and improved, and these babies deserve to be fought for.
Yeah, I think mainstreaming them has also been part of their longevity, not putting them in institutions, but having them grow up in families and with and in schools where they're with other people. Lila, you're doing so much good work. Thanks for joining us and weighing in on this issue.
Thanks for having me.
This story hits me very hard on multiple levels. First of all, you know that I'm 100% pro-life. I make no apologies for that, and I talk a lot about it on my podcast. I've talked about a lot about it here on Culture Watch. I talk a lot about it on Speaking for Him. It's one of the core issues that I deal with at this ministry, because my firm belief is that if you don't have the right to life, you don't have any other right. Every other right comes from the right to life, because if you're not alive, you can't experience any other rights. You can't exercise any other rights. So that's the first thing, is that I'm 100% unequivocally pro-life. The second thing is that this man celebrated the fact that his wife was pregnant, got halfway through the pregnancy, and then got some indication through testing that his child had markers for Down syndrome, and decided to terminate his wife's pregnancy at 21 weeks. So after he's already told everyone that he's excited to have this child, then he comes back on and says, I decided not to have this child because this child has been tested positively in utero for Down syndrome. Now, let me be clear. Whether or not this child has Down syndrome, they should still have life, because they are a creation of Almighty God. But it is doubling down on the sick factor to be someone who celebrates the fact that you're having a baby, because we never say you're having a clump of cells. We never say you're having a fetus. We say you're having a baby. And then to turn around when you get this test and abort the baby because you do not want to deal with this diagnosis. And he literally said that this is an objectively crappy, I'm substituting the word that he actually said, that it's an objectively crappy way of life for a person to live. So not only does he abort his child, which I believe is an abomination to God, but then he says to a whole class of people who are walking the earth, who are being raised by their parents, who are living fulfilling lives, some of whom are working and are married, and he says to them, because I don't want to expose my child to your objectively crappy way of life, I am going to end that child's life. Now, here's the thing that breaks my heart to the core. But I hope that it's waking up people to the fact that when we talk about abortion, We are talking about actual babies. The Bible says, "You knit me together in my mother's womb. I am fearfully and wonderfully made." But you say, well, I don't believe the Bible, so take the Bible out of it. Okay, let's take the Bible out of it. You can now go and get ultrasounds, some of which are even 3D, and see your baby moving around on screen and know without a doubt that it's not a clump of cells, but in fact a baby. I say often that when Roe versus Wade came down in 1973 and legalized the killing of unborn children in all 50 states, we might have had a certain degree of plausible deniability. One of the things they did with Roe versus Wade and the companion decision, Doe versus Bolton, is they established that a baby could be aborted up to the age of viability, but they never bothered to define what the age of viability was. And so essentially, they wrote a carte blanche check in this area to call abortion health care and to say that you could get it done through all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason. Now we've had a situation where Roe versus Wade fell a couple of years ago, which I'm thankful for. And so certain states have restrictions on abortion, others do not. But even scarier is that to this point, the Supreme Court has not deemed it necessary to limit or end the abortion pill. And that is the least, I'm sure, recorded method of abortion ever, because you can just go online and get a doctor to give you the pills and end your child's life through this process. Now, the good news is it's a multiple pill process, and apparently if you've taken the first pill, you can get a reversal pill to save your child's life before you take the second pill. That's good news. But I don't know how many people are actually taking advantage of that. Here's the thing. They call abortion health care, yet abortion, through the whole existence of its legality, has been the least regulated thing within the healthcare moniker. Michigan worked very hard for several years to limit abortion by requiring abortion clinics to have standards that are required of every other healthcare facility. Now, I don't know how many of those laws are still in place, because a couple of years ago, Proposal 3 came through and basically uprooted a lot of pro-life laws here in Michigan. I feel very sad to be a Michigander at this point, at least on the pro-life issue. But for a long time, that is what Michigan did, because they said, if you're going to call it a medical procedure, then it needs to follow medical protocol, and you need to meet the standards, the minimum standards for a medical facility in the state of Michigan. And many facilities did close down because they didn't meet that criteria. But here is the situation, Mr. Ridgway and Ashley. I can only imagine how scared you might have been to realize that your child may be less than perfect. I know that my parents were scared when I was born with a disability. But there is a whole community of people who are raising children with Down syndrome who could have answered your questions and helped you through this time. The next thing I would say to the Ridgways is this. There are a lot of in utero fetal abnormality tests that end up being dead wrong. I'll never forget getting a call from a cousin of mine whose wife was pregnant for their youngest child, and he said, I don't know what to do. They're saying that my youngest child may have spina bifida. What do you know about it? Can you tell me about it? What should we be aware of? And apparently she was considering ending that child's life and being pressured by certain people to do just that. Well, I told them my experience with it. I said I had friends with spina bifida that were able to live full lives, and that if this child indeed had spina bifida, that they had a lot of resources available to them that would help them to raise a child with a disability. But fast forward a few months, and their child was born absolutely normal. Now, don't miss this. A child with a disability is just as valuable as any other child. But it is extremely frightening how many stories I have read over the last couple of weeks about people who said, my doctor said, that my child was going to be profoundly disabled, and when the child was born, the child was fine. Doctors often, in cases like this, do not know what they are talking about. And I have to wonder to myself whether this child even had Down syndrome. And how many children are in heaven today with Jesus rather than being raised by their parents who would have been perfectly healthy, but their parents listened to the doctors. Because, well, doctors are supposed to know. But beyond that, I think it's Iceland has gotten to a point where they have virtually no people with Down syndrome in their whole country. And you may look at that and you may say, well, they evaluated the factors and they figured out how to help people have healthier babies. No, that's not how it happened. How it happened was they abort every single child that has that diagnosis. And then they flaunt the fact that they don't have children with Down syndrome in their country. And even in the U.S., I've heard that the percentage of babies that are found to have it or suspected to have it before birth are aborted to the tune of as many as 60 to 70% of them in the U.S. That is out and out eugenics. You know, people like to call certain politicians Hitler. No one is more Hitler than a doctor who urges you to abort because of a suspected fetal abnormality. Because remember, that was the whole point of Adolf Hitler's mission, was to come up with a superior race, a perfect race. And that is what you are doing when you are saying that a child with Down syndrome is not compatible with life. This is very serious stuff, folks. And I hope it wakes you up to the fact that if this child was an actual unborn baby who should have had life if his parents weren't selfish, that a child who is perfectly formed, whose parents choose to end his life because he or she doesn't fit in, is just as valuable and just as in danger. You know, we can talk all day and all night about the way in which we should restrict abortion, how abortion should be illegal. But the more I think about it, the more I realize what we need to do is cultivate a society where abortion is unthinkable. And the biggest thing that we need to do is humanize these babies. And I think what this little baby did, more than anything else, is humanize the situation. Because these parents were excited for his arrival until he was less than perfect, until he supposedly had Down syndrome, and then they just got rid of him. But if you think about it, that's the whole agenda of the pro-abortion side of things. And I know they like to use the words pro-choice, but just look at the way abortion clinic workers respond to those who are pro-life, who reach out to people at abortion clinics, and you will see that they have one agenda, and that's to make sure that a woman that goes into the clinic with a baby comes out without one. That is the bottom line. It's sad, but it's the bottom line, and we need to pray for the end of abortion, not through legislation so much as through the changing of hearts, the changing of minds, and the support that we can give to those who are in crisis. It is so important. Well, I'm about to wrap up today's show, but I wanted to end, as I always do, on a note of encouragement, and I saw a really neat video this week as I was scrolling through, and I want to share it with you today. This is World War II veteran Don Graves, who happens to be 100 years old. I think and hope he is still alive, but apparently he shared God Bless America within the last year or two at a Memorial Day celebration. So here is Don Graves, 100-year-old World War II veteran, sharing God Bless America.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above, from the mountain to the prairie, to the ocean, while we fall. God bless America, our home sweet home. God bless America, our home sweet home.
So there is Don Graves doing his rendition of God Bless America. And I'm so grateful for his service. Again, I'm not sure of his current status, whether he is still with us, but I thought, in light of the fact that we recently celebrated Memorial Day and that we're about to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States of America, that would be a good way to close out the show. That's all I have to share with you on today's edition of the Culture Watch podcast. If you have enjoyed this podcast, as I said before, please share it with your family and friends. Maybe you can choose 3 to 5 people who have never been exposed to Speaking for Him content and let them know when and how to listen. And as you know, you can watch this podcast on YouTube as well now, and we have video from each of the news stories that I shared today, so you'll want to be a part of the Speaking for Him YouTube community. I also look forward to any comments, questions, or concerns you may have, so please share them with the contact information that's about to roll at the end of the show. With that being said, have a great week, and keep serving the best of masters.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Your host has been Andrew Gomison, founder of Speaking for Him. For information on today's show and to leave us comments and voicemails, please visit Speaking for Him. That is speaking numeral for him.blogspot.com. You can find Andrew's ministry at speakingforhim.com. That's speaking the number 4 HIM.com. And when you look for us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or all other major podcast platforms, let us know what you think of the podcast by leaving a rating and a review. Intro music for this podcast is provided by Audio Kraken. Transition music is provided by Superstate. Both of these tracks are available free of charge from Pond 5 pond5.com, pond numeral 5.com.